There was a little game we used to play in schools, like in grade school or something. And what we did is you have maybe 15, 20 students in the classroom. And the teacher would tell the first student, give them a sentence, whisper it in their ear. And then that student would turn around and whisper it into the next student's ear, and then the next student's ear, and so on, all the way to the end. And then the very last student would actually say the sentence. And the whole idea was trying to see if the same information that was communicated at the beginning was carried all the way through to the end. And what we found time after time, I think it took us several times to actually get it right, was how the information changed as it went down the line, and how one student would hear something different than another student, and the information would change. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is that, believe it or not, that same process of misinformation traveling down the line, believe it or not, happens in many places. And sadly enough, it actually happens in the education field, especially when it comes to health and studying health, fitness, and wellness. Well, today I'm bringing back on one of my favorite guests, and he was on just a recent podcast, Dr. Paul Langevin of Star Valley Osteopathy, to discuss the misinformation in health education today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Hey, good day, and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Edge Fitness and the host of the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm here in, of all places, one of my favorite places, Alpine, Wyoming, out in the northern part of the Star Valley area, visiting with my good friend, Dr. Paul Langevin. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you being on the show again. Dr. Langevin, as I said in the intro, has done a few podcasts with us, and we talked about his practice. He's with Star Valley Osteopathy. He is a DO, Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. And we talked in that last podcast that we did, we talked about dealing with fascia and dealing with actually teaching the body to heal itself, which is what our practice is about. Now, this podcast actually came from the four of us having breakfast, my wife and I, you and Jennifer. Yeah. And by the way we met, Jennifer, his wife, was a trainer of ours. When he was actually studying in Pensacola, we're actually stationed in Pensacola, would you say?
My base was Pensacola, but Jen wanted to go to nursing school.
Right.
At USA.
Okay.
And so we lived in Fairhope.
Was in the
Still
Navy.
One of my favorite places in the world.
Yeah,
so.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
One of mine too, definitely. Your medical career is amazing, especially with the time you have with the Navy. The brief stint you had as an emergency physician, working in between, I call it in between your military stints, but also was the medical director for the Nimitz and its, would you call that a fleet? I mean...
that's called a Carrier Strike Group.
Carrier Strike Group. So the medical director of that had an incredible facility on the Nimitz, and just amazing. But rushing through that, because I referenced in the introduction the other podcast that we talked about that history. But this came from us having breakfast, and you mentioning that you, while you were in Pensacola, was part of the requirement you had that you had to get an MPH, a Master's in Public Health. This is a degree that I'm actually jealous of that he has. In fact, so much so that I think I'm going to go get a DPH just so I can get one better. Yeah. I'm jealous of it because that particular degree is the degree that one of my two heroes, Dr. Kenneth Cooper, has, with the Master's in Public Health. But what came of this is it's not a confrontation, I should say, but an experience you had about some of the lack of education. Go through a little bit of that.
Well, I think what started it was one of your podcasts on fat.
Yes.
An MPH typically is 2 years.
Right.
Mine was done through the University of West Florida.
Right.
And as part of the residency program. Hopefully what you should do is kind of, because public health is so massive.
Right.
So are you going to do epidemiology? Are you going to focus? So I wanted my papers to kind of focus on a couple of things that I wanted. One was for the Navy. So I focused on sleep and fatigue in aviation.
Right.
And that was my ultimate thesis. But then you have all these courses you have to take, all these papers that you write, and you kind of want to focus on stuff.
Sure.
And so my biggest focus for my personal interests was nutrition and the myths of nutrition. These, that's the way it is.
Right.
Which should never be.
I've forgotten now that's how that conversation started. You referenced a podcast that had aired just a week or so before, and that's where I talked about saturated fat. And this is something I talk about a lot, the lipid hypothesis, what I call the beginning of how live food, and the fact that in 2020, the Journal of American Cardiology finally came out and said, saturated fat being tied to heart disease, that's not really true. When we've known that for so long.
But the data's been there for a couple decades. And that was my MPH.
My point exactly.
My MPH started in 2014. I graduated from the program in 2016. That's when I got my MPH. And so when I write these papers, and one of them was saturated fat.
Right.
There's a meta-analysis that looked at all these smaller studies around and said, well, we really can't find any data that suggests saturated fat and heart disease and strokes really are a thing.
Wow, isn't that interesting?
And I had that meta-analysis, and I have more citations on pages than my actual write-up. And so I would turn those in, and the professor would be like, okay, well, this is well-cited, well-written. It just doesn't sound right to me. What? just didn't look right. It's sort of like when you're spelling and you check a word in the dictionary and you write it down for somebody, and somebody looks at it and goes, I know, but it just don't look right. Yeah, and it's this. We have these. One thing you try to eliminate in science is bias, and there's so many biases out there.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And so we have these institutional biases. Well, this institute says this, and or this textbook says this.
Right.
But when a textbook's come out, especially in like physiology or anatomy or something like that, it's already 5, 6, 7 years out.
Exactly.
It's out of date.
Right.
And so we get into this group think of fat bad, cholesterol bad.
Right.
This better.
Period.
Yeah.
And it's like a rut.
And another paper that I wrote was kind of the history of where we went off the rails. Okay.
I love this.
So I think it was 1978, Congress passed the Nutrition Act saying that fat bad,
right, right,
sugar good,
right.
And people don't realize, and so I read actual editorials and opinion statements from nutritional magazines back then. And they were all scratching their head like, where did this come from? I mean, heads of programs, UCLA, Harvard, not Harvard, but Stanford, different programs. And they're like, editorials in these magazines from 1977, 1978, when the debates were going on, like, there's no data,
period,
to support this whatsoever. Why are they doing this?
Right.
But then they got in line really quickly after this passed, because what happens from that? Yes, a bunch of people who know nothing, who were selling furniture one day, and now are congressmen the next day, pass this law. That sets up your financial incentives from there, because NIH gives more money for research than any other organization in the world.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to interrupt you a second because I want to let everybody know how to get in touch with us, because we're about to get very controversial here if you haven't heard us do this before. And I'm also going to let you know the other agency that does the funding, that picks up the slack that NIH doesn't pick up, and why it went off the rails too. So if you're interested in this particular topic, which I hope you are, especially if you feel strongly the other way, because personally I think it's dangerous, and we'd love to talk to you about that. So reach out to me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. That, of course, is our website and our Facebook page. Hit me up on X at Team PE if you're so inclined. And Paul, listen, I'm gonna throw you under the bus too. Let them know how to get in touch with you if you're making them upset.
So if you're upset with me, you can visit my website. It's www.starvalleyOMM. That's Oscar Mike at .com. And in there, you'll have my phone number and contact and email and all that stuff, so you can get upset with me through there, and I'll respond probably. So.
Okay. All right. We're doing a little check on research here, okay? Mm-hmm. This goes along with the presentation that I do. It's a 4-part podcast early on, and when I was doing my podcast about 4 years ago, and it's something I talk about a lot. My favorite thing to speak on is the live age, which is the ridiculous concept that time passing on a calendar actually causes deterioration. Mm-hmm. Something else you and I agree on. Number 2 is the live food, the ridiculous concept there is such thing as bad food, and that we're not doing these things to ourselves. And it's a history lesson more than anything. When I give this talk, if I'm going to give it to a group, I'm really trying to, hey, look, I'm going to have some pushback here or whatever. A lot of times I'll have a dietitian in the room with me. And in fact, I gave it to my staff recently because we have new staff members. And I had a good friend of mine who's a dietitian in the room with me. And she shared something with me which is very similar to your experience. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you what, I'll come back to that in a second. So I want to go back to that because we were talking about the resistance that you came upon. Well, I'll touch on it. The fact that in school, when she was getting her degree in dietetics and then becoming a registered dietitian, not a clinical nutritionist, a registered dietitian. She said she ran into that. It was that stuck thinking. She said that they had instructors that this is just the way it is and you're supposed to believe it. And if she or any of the students challenged it, wait a second, there's so much data, as you say, out there.
Yeah.
And I'm not, no offense, my friend, I'm not the nerd you are. I was able to find the data. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That she was getting pushed back from them. So what you were talking about that is we see that day in and day out. But the history lessons you were talking, were you talking by any chance about the McGovern Commission? I want to say it was a gentleman from Ohio University. And he was I don't know that he was the Angel Keys biochemist. I've forgotten his exact background. But he actually pleaded with the committee. They have this on video. Wait, sir, please, will you please wait till all the data comes out? And I want to say that was the data from the MR Fit study, which is the one they used. That they had 12,000 men involved in this. They spent millions on it. In 1970s, it was the study that they found out that smoking was related to heart disease.
Yep.
He was waiting on that data to come out and said, please wait, because if you don't, you could cause a problem that would have epidemic proportions.
Yeah.
And McGovern's actual quote to him was, sir, we're senators. We don't have time to wait.
Yeah.
And this is what you said, furniture salesmen, now politicians, that are now pushing that agenda. Back to your paper, though, you were saying you were citing examples about this and you were getting resistance to it.
I don't know about resistance. I mean, I was still getting good grades, but because it was
good work.
I wrote them well and I cited them.
Right.
But it was just the mentality of, well, yeah, your conclusions probably aren't right, despite all that you have all those facts, just because the system doesn't really accept those conclusions.
Right. In your studies, did you ever come upon Angel Keys?
No.
Lipid hypothesis?
Briefly, yeah.
Briefly, yeah. And you were talking about a lot of it going back to the 70s when the government got involved.
Yeah, but they were basing this stuff off of the 60s and 50s,
Of
and
course.
they got into the Mediterranean diet.
Right.
Well, we're going to look at these 7 countries. Well, no, you looked at a ton of countries, but you got rid of them because it didn't match your
22
data.
countries and threw out 15 of them. Yeah.
It's science is come up with a hypothesis.
Right.
Test that hypothesis. Is the methodology good? You want sound methodology. Does the data support your hypothesis? That's it.
Right.
Now we've been in this circular thinking of trying to get your data to fit the hypothesis.
Right. Right.
And that's been true in a lot of different fields, not just nutrition, but that's a whole different controversy, and there's a replication crisis. This is well known. People write a lot of stuff that is supposed to be seminal and this proves this. But then when somebody goes to replicate it, they can't. And that's part of science.
Right.
You're supposed to be able to write everything out and say, I'm fairly certain that my hypothesis is good because of this data. Somebody should be able to take that, replicate it, and come up with the same results. A lot of scientific fields are having a hard time reaching that goal.
If you're a fan of the podcast, you've heard this before. The basic studies, you mentioned the 7 country studies, which was Angel Keys' studies. Angel Keys, for those of you who don't know, was a biochemist. And before I throw him under the bus, because I am going to, I'm going to if you're a fan of the podcast, he did some good work. He actually invented K rations. He actually did a starvation study that was fascinating. Yeah. That new book, Exercise, and I'm trying to think of the author. I'm reading it right now, and I can't think of the author's name. He's a sociologist from Harvard talking about why we exercise or whatever, and he actually dives into the starvation study. During World War II, there were a lot of not conscientious objectors that really wanted to do something, but because of their religion, they had to object. And so he was able to get them to get involved into a starvation study because they had people coming out of POW camps and whatever, and they were wondering, what can the body handle? This is a study that can never be replicated now. So it was amazing work, and we still have a lot of data from that. But where he really went off the rails was in the 1950, I'm going to get this date wrong. I think it's 56 or 57. It may have been earlier than that. World Health Organization. He presented their annual meeting, whatever. He presented a hypothesis, and the hypothesis stated 2 things. Number 1, high saturated fat diets cause high cholesterol. Now, that is actually true. Number 2, high cholesterol causes heart disease. Bingo. Do you hear that? Bingo. Exactly. Yeah. Never been proven, not true, whatever. Yeah. And the reason he got the funding that he needed to pursue this, to really go after this, was in 1953. Dwight D. Eisenhower had a heart attack and scared the heck out of the entire nation. And we wanted to find somebody that knew about heart disease. And we're going to look for a German. It's 1953. I don't think we're not looking for somebody from Asia, Japan. No, I'm thinking not. We're looking for American, and we went after Angel Keys, gave him, the U.S. government, this is before the invention of the National Institute of Health, but gave him an annual budget of $250,000.
In 1950s.
Bingo. Now,
yeah.
you're able to do this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How much money was that? Not a total budget, but annual budget. That's where he developed the 7-country study. That's where he came up with writing with his wife, the Mediterranean diet, and Eat Well, Stay Well, whatever the 2 books they produced, before they produced their information. And then that study they've been trying to replicate that all the way into the 2000s and never have, which is why the American Journal of Cardiology finally said, 2020, we should probably state that this isn't true.
Yeah.
So, which is amazing. But in your practice, because we talked about this in the last podcast, people coming to you a lot of times because they're hurt. Something's hurt, something bothers them. And you're looking at, we talked about in the last podcast about dealing with fascia and how these connective tissues have so much to do with everything we do. But then you talk about, you're living 30 minutes from Jackson, skiing. You got hiking all around here. These people want to stay active. And that goes to, where do you see, like, what I call the live food? You run into those problems of that. Or the live age, as far as I can keep going. What do you tell your patients?
So, like we talked about on the last podcast, is I'm going to help you move better. Now it's up to you to maintain that or even get better.
Right.
And so, 1, I want you to be active. 2, I need you drinking a lot of water.
Right.
And then 3, what's your food like? What are you eating?
Right.
Okay. Not a dietitian. I don't deal with a lot of nutrition, but I want to look at a big picture.
Absolutely.
Are you eating enough food to match what your demands are?
Caloric consideration. Let's put it that way.
Are you restricting anything?
Right.
Because I really don't want people restricting anything.
Absolutely.
You need enough protein to recover. When you work out, you break down the muscle, but you also you don't really break it down, but you do strengthen the fascia. So we don't know yet, but we believe that fascia follows Wolff's Law. Have you heard of Wolff's Law?
Yes.
So Wolff, for those people who don't know, was a German surgeon and anatomist. And he postulated that bone gets stronger perpendicular to the force. And so if you want to prevent osteoporosis, you put resistance on the body.
Right.
Running will put certain resistance on certain parts of your bone, but if you're talking about overall, you lift weights.
Right.
You
right.
do you need to do stuff.
And lifting weights, hitting every part of the body.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hitting every part of the body. And we think that fascia probably does the same thing. And so that's part of working out. So you have the concentric aspect of working out. You're going to really tear down that muscle. It's going to build that up.
Exactly.
You need amino acids, you need fat, and you need sugar for the repair system to happen.
These are the building blocks for it, period, yeah.
The eccentric aspect of it helps build the fascia stronger.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It came out quite a while ago, probably 20 years ago, that doing eccentric exercises for the Achilles tendon help with Achilles tendon injuries. And we think that it causes something to do with the fascia in there.
Right.
We don't know. We don't know much about it. We don't have a lot of data on fascia.
Right.
And a tendon is fascia.
Dr. Langevin keeps saying, we think, we don't know, we're not sure. And this goes to the argument I've made, and you and I actually talked about in the last podcast, and that is that the human body is an amazing machine. We still don't know everything about it. And in this particular subject, it's one that we haven't, there's not a whole lot of money in researching it. It kills me because it can make us live longer. That's the reason for the guessing. It's not the fact that we don't know that there are things that go on there. There are. And this isn't astrology. No offense to my astrology friends. But we're not guessing at this. We're still studying it. And there's answers to all of that. So which is what you're stating.
For the system to work to repair itself, you need the appropriate diet and the appropriate building blocks to repair.
Right.
So one of the things that really changed for me when I was doing emergency medicine was, we talk about heart attacks, we talk about strokes, but those aren't the number one killers of people. It's frailty.
Right.
Okay. I saw it day in, day out doing emergency medicine. You have a little old lady, little old man, they fell. Why did they fall? Right. Because they tripped over a little crinkle in the rug or an extension cord, and they didn't have the strength to arrest the fall. They didn't have enough tissue to protect them when they did fall.
Bingo.
And then for the next 2 years, they're just circling the drain. 95% of Medicare expenditure is in the last 2 years of a person's life because they're coming in and out of my ER because they got a pneumonia now or they have a DVT.
95% of the expenditures are in the last 2 years.
Yes.
That should tell you something about what we're talking about, the live age, and where the emphasis is put on research as far as preventing these falls or what have you. So 95, that's amazing.
A stronger person will not fall,
Period.
or if they do, they'll have enough tissue to protect the fragile bones, and
Absolutely.
they'll also have stronger bones.
Right.
Nutrition is vital to that. because you need to be able to build that tissue up. And so that's key. And so I just want to make sure that they're having enough food, a well-rounded diet, and that it is matching their output.
This is where I thought it was so dangerous, and why I actually put together the live food and I talk about that so much, is that when we started criminalizing, we criminalized red meat, we criminalized dairy, and we criminalized eggs.
Yep.
All right, right there, look at the protein sources we're stomping on. And at the same time, what do we see happen? We saw obesity start going crazy. So we saw heart disease did not change. In fact, it went up, went far worse. But we saw
autoimmune issues.
Bingo. Osteoporosis going up or whatever. Why? Because we're deciding to hate these foods. We're still living with the ramifications of that today.
Oh, there's absolute fear. Well, I'm going to have lean chicken. Why?
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's great. Don't get me wrong. Love it.
Yeah, that's fine. But
yeah.
Are you a bodybuilder?
Right.
Are you going for a competition?
Yeah, exactly.
Have some fat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Have some cholesterol.
How important that is. How many people to this day, and if you're listening to this, I'm sure you're not foreign to what I'm about to say, and that how many people to this day calculate how much red meat they've had in a week? I like to have that steak. Well, wait a second, though. That was 3 days ago I had a steak. I can't have red meat again. That drives me nuts, and that all stems from that lie and from that diversion. And like we said earlier, that's made into our educational system. Yeah. On the health side. And I'm beating that to death, but that's what you ran into. That's what my friend, the dietitian, ran into. That's what I still run into in talking to exercise physiologists who are instructors at schools. And they hear me talk on the live age. They hear the talk on the live food. And the answer I get is, well, yeah, but that's just not true.
If you are inactive and you're eating this stuff,
right,
you run into problems with that.
Yes.
So when they do these population studies, and they have to do tens and 20s of thousands of people when they look at this, and it's usually a prospective or a retrospective study. So it's hard to do randomized control studies on this, which is the gold standard. So what happens is that they do these studies, and they're like, well, red meat looks like it's bad. But if you take those people that are active, it's gone.
Period. I ran into a physician recently who's gotten big into this clean cooking and what have you. And don't get me wrong, that sounds great. But I actually was in a setting where they were doing a panel, and I actually asked them a question. I said, when are we going to pay attention to amounts? Because they were talking about obesity, and they had not touched on. They talked about all kinds of food. They hadn't said one word about amounts, not one word.
Yeah.
And obesity, forget about BMI. It's a worthless, made-up number.
Yeah.
The obesity. Textbook definition of obesity: a male who has 26% body fat or more, a female has 30% body fat or more. I don't care if you run a 5-minute mile. If you've got those numbers or whatever, you're obese. They didn't say a word about amounts. That's an amount. They didn't say one word about amounts of food. And he actually cited a study to me. I went and looked it up. He cited a study to me. Well, that study they did where they had people do 2,000 calories of bad food and 2,000 calories of good food, and the people with 2,000 calories of bad food gain weight. And I said, well, what was their activity level? You know what the answer was? I don't know.
Yeah.
You kidding me? You didn't look at,
Yeah. So
this car with this gas gets great gas mileage. This other car with this other gas didn't need any gas mileage. Did you happen to measure how far the cars drove? No.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
And you see this a lot, and it doesn't only happen in medicine and health and nutrition studies, but people read abstracts.
Right.
I'll read the abstract and say, okay, that's interesting. I don't care about their little intro,
right?
Because it's a lot of fluff. What's the methodology?
A period. Exactly. How did you come about that?
One, and a lot of this stuff is just sniff tests. Well, that's not even an approved standard to measure that.
Yeah.
So why would you use that? And you crumple up that study and you throw it away.
Any study that comes up and talks about obesity and what we used to measure that was BMI. Okay.
Yeah. It's a lot of studies out there are just trash and garbage.
Right.
Because everybody has a pressure to publish, and so they just publish something.
Yeah, exactly.
And for this residency program or this nutrition training program or something, okay, well, part of the requirements is you need to do a study. One, they're not given money. Two, they're not given time.
Right.
And so the methodology is usually lacking.
Very much so.
And if that doesn't pass, then everything in that study is worthless.
Right.
It's hard to get a number, but when they start looking at like medical studies, hypertension, diabetes, or what have you,
right,
over 75% of it is worthless.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
And it's just not medicine. Psychology had a replication crisis just 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
That these big studies that they hung their hat on,
right,
policies, treatment, what have you, could not be replicated.
Oh, my gosh. Amazing.
And that's true in a lot of fields.
And we see it every day in ours, what we're talking about.
Yes.
You know, you got to stop us here because I think we have people upset.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to turn this around, spin it, and make it a little more positive because there's some actually great news out of this. And that is what we were talking about earlier about the fact that how amazing the human body is. You know, the fact that we haven't taken time to study the fascia, haven't taken time to actually study what does work as far as nutrition is concerned, doesn't mean that we can't turn that around. And we can't also first and foremost, believe that by doing, I always say 3 simple things. You may add to it. Fitness. And when I say fitness, I walk every day. What's that doing for your shoulders? What's that doing for your chest, back? I'm talking full body resistance training, at least 3 to 4 days a week at least. And then water, not just some water, not just all I drink is water, 100 ounces a day, hitting that every single day, not missing. And then protein, end of day, protein. You know, making sure you've got every meal every day on protein. Outside of that, I mean, if you're doing that and barring any unforeseen accidents, I just don't know how long you can live. And please, make me mad if you want to. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or are there things you would add to that?
I would add recovery, sleep.
Oh, awesome.
Before electricity, when the sun went down, you were getting ready for bed.
Right.
And then you may get up a little bit before the sun came up.
Yeah.
So enough sleep, enough quality sleep.
Right.
And just in our world, screen time affects sleep. You know, caffeine affects sleep. I don't have any caffeine after 11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Because while you'll have that hour and a half acute hyperness of caffeine,
exactly,
they've shown that the hyperactivity in the brain lasts for 7 to 8 hours.
Oh, wow.
So good quality sleep is vital.
Sure.
Once I get people sleeping well, their pain level just on that alone goes down.
And that's mainly
my chronic pain patients.
Right, and that mainly goes to the fact of what you're saying. Your body's being allowed to shut down and recover. It's sort of like you run a truck 24 hours and work on it at the same time. Not going to. When you shut down, you can actually work on it, repair things.
Exactly.
That's what your body's
doing.
Yeah.
And so my son, he's a big snowboarder.
Right.
And so he went up to Targhee for 5 days straight.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, hey, you doing okay? He's like, yeah, I took your advice, and I'm eating more protein before I go to sleep, and that's helping the soreness and what
If you can get it done in your own family, that's amazing.
Exactly, right? Wow, they listen to me?
Yeah, exactly. I understand.
Wow,
So
I better mark this on my calendar. So sleep and recovery are massive.
Right.
And that's probably the thing that people, I need to work out. I need to be active.
Yeah,
I need to go do this.
Period. When in doubt, work harder.
Yeah.
And that was the mantra for so many years. The generation before mine and yours, that was the answer to everything. Work harder. And I've seen that in some of my senior patients and senior clients of when in doubt, they want to add days. They want to work out more. No, rest, recover, whatever. So I appreciate that. I'm going to add that to my mantra. I think that's absolutely, and I can't believe we've skipped it so far. So as always, you and I could go on here for days. So, but let them know how to get in touch with you. You have any questions about your field or any questions dealing about what we've talked about today?
Yeah, I'm open up to any questions, so you can contact me. Just go to my website, starvalleyomm.com. My phone number's there, my email. There's even a contact section in there, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about anything.
Yeah. Want to get in touch with the show, please contact us at area code 251-278-3343. If you have any questions that you want answered on the show, I'm sure that you wouldn't mind if I reached out to you. We could go. I wish I could come back over here, but if we can't be over here, we'll get on the phone and answer the question there on the show.
Oh yeah.
If you have any questions concerning this, reach out to me at Garrett GARRETT at personaledgefitness.com. That's of course our website also, personaledgefitness.com. Personal Edge Fitness is our Facebook page. Hit me up on X at Team PE if you're so inclined. Please help us out with the podcast. Like and share, and also follow our podcast. We want to do all we can about getting the truth out to you to help you live your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.